is so good to see all of you in the audience today. Thank you for joining us for Forming an Open Source Culture in Federal Agencies. My name is Remy DeCosmaker. We're here from the Open Source Program Office here at the Digital Services at CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And our deck, of course, is obligatorily on GitHub, open source as well. We'll share that link in chat for anybody who wants to have a copy. So thank you, and we'll get into the agenda. So for today's agenda, we're going to let you know about who we are, what is CMS, what is the digital service, what is open source for our friends who may not be aware, what is an open source program office, what is the Share IT Act, what is the stack, and the different pieces of it that we have built. And then we're going to do some demos. Then we're going to talk about what is the potential impact, and then we're going to open it up for any questions and feedback that y'all might have for us today. So let's get into it. Again, I'm Remy DeCosmaker, open source lead, digital service at CMS. I've been here for about 3 years now, and I'm calling in from Washington, D.C., and I will pass it over to Dina.
Hi, I'm Dina Kapelovich, and I am a software engineer also working with the Open Source Program Office. I'm calling in from Denver, and I've been with the office for about a year, and I'll pass it to Isaac.
Hi, I'm Isaac Molarski. I'm also a software engineer working at the Open Source Program Office. I'm calling in from Columbia, Missouri, and I'll pass it to Sachin.
Hey everyone, my name is Sachin Panil. I am also a software engineer here at the Open Source Program Office, calling in from New York, and I've been around here, or in the Open Source Program Office, for a year now, and I'll pass it to Nat.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalia Luzariaga. I'm also a software engineer as part of the CMS OSPO and been doing so for 2 years. And I will pass it back to Sachin to kick us off.
Thanks, Nat. So what is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services? So CMS is a federal agency that provides health coverage to more than 160 million people through Medicare, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and the Health Insurance Marketplace. CMS works in partnership with the entire healthcare community to improve quality, equity, and outcomes in the healthcare system. So who do we serve? We serve the American people. We have 67.8 million Medicare beneficiaries, 82.3 million Medicaid beneficiaries, and we also serve 21.1 million people through healthcare.gov. We also serve the taxpayers. So we have a budget of $1.76 trillion, which accounts for 22% of the entire US federal budget. We also take in $1.05 trillion worth of total Medicare payments. And we also take in $846 billion worth of total Medicaid payments. And we also serve the healthcare system as a whole. We have around 6,000 CMS employees. We serve around 1.5 million healthcare providers. And again, like I said previously, we are 22% of the entire US Medicare budget.
So if that's who we serve, what is the digital service? What do we do? We transform the US healthcare system by improving design and user experiences, by delivering value to government providers and patients. We help to modernize systems, and we participate in policy development. And how do we do it? We deploy small groups of designers, engineers, and product managers on a tour of duty to work alongside dedicated civil servants. These multidisciplinary teams help to bring best practices and new approaches to support government modernization efforts. So what is open source software? Well, it means that we have source code that anyone can inspect, modify, enhance, and share. And even if you haven't heard of it, it's estimated, according to a recent study by Black Duck, that 96% of all commercial software contains open source code, which represents about $8.8 trillion of value if it all had to be written from scratch, according to a recent Harvard Business School study. So if that's what open source is, then what does an open source program office do? Well, we serve as the center of competency for an organization's open source operations, strategy, and structure. We are responsible for defining and implementing the programs, policies, and projects that guide these efforts. About 30% of Fortune 100 companies have implemented an OSPO, with 84% of them developing or managing the Gen AI infrastructure at those organizations. And CMS is the first United States federal agency to implement this private sector style approach to an open source strategy. And what is our goal? Well, really, it boils down to a couple different things. We're here to save money and save time. We're here to reduce duplicate work and reduce duplicate costs. We're here to reduce security risk and continuity risk. We're here to provide accountability for performance, both for contractors and feds, and provide transparency, and serve as an engine for talent, which is evidenced by some of the folks here you see in the sidebar, but also folks through our early career talent program. Big shout out to Coding It Forward, big shout out to Code in the Schools, big shout out to the Urban Alliance, big shout out to all the folks that we have contributing from the outside world. We really appreciate you folks working with us, and open source is a unique strategy for engaging with the public to help have an impact on infrastructure and projects that all the folks that we serve depend on every day. So specifically, we're here today to talk about the Share IT Act. This is the bill summary that was, you can read right on the bill summary page on the US Congress website, which is linked at the bottom. But to give a little bit of a TLDR, it requires federal agencies starting in July of 2025 was when it was enacted, and it was passed in December of 2024 as a bipartisan bill. And it requires that custom developed code, whether it's produced by a contract or the government, federal employees, and certain components of the code, such as architecture, designs, and metadata, are owned by the agency, stored in no less than one public or private repo, accessible to federal employees under certain procedures, and that contracts acquire exercise rights to allow for government-wide access, sharing, and reuse of any custom developed code. And of course, there are some exemptions for that as well, such as national security, national intelligence, if it jeopardizes the privacy of an individual, or if it's exempt from FOIA. So there are a pretty narrow set of exemptions according to the legislation, and you can read more about it in the actual bill, which we link to and we'll share links for later. But generally, that's the overview. And to talk more about what we built with that context, I'll pass it over to Dina to start talking about our stack.
Hey, so we know that navigating bills such as the Share IT Act and can be difficult, and also that not everyone is a software engineer. So we have created a one-stop shop for everything Share IT Act. This includes documentation, a glossary, and tools such as our code.json generator form and our index generator, as well as a lot more. And with that, I'll pass it on to Natalia.
Thanks, Dina. So as Remy mentioned, the Share IT Act, it requires that metadata on all agency projects, with some exemptions, must be published. And the Share IT Act specifically requires specific metadata to be published, like reuse frequency, contract number, feedback mechanisms. So as part of the implementation, the OSPO, we use a software metadata standard called code.json. It includes around 40 various fields of software information, where we extended the existing M1621 metadata standard to include the new required fields from the Share IT Act. And so we decided to create a web form to assist project teams with including metadata in the form of a code.json file, which they can add to a repository. And they can do so using this web form on the screen here called code.json generator. So the web form starts out with assisting the user with a checklist that helps them identify whether their project is exempted or not. We are able to automate around a third of the 34 fields on the site using the GitHub API. And finally, when we have collected all the metadata and created a code.json file, we offer 4 methods to save the metadata so the user can add this information to their repository. Next slide. And so the way that we built this tool is using a open source platform, a form builder called form.io. Super neat platform. It is a super easy way for us to easily spin up forms that assist our needs with the implementation of the Act. Specifically, we use their US web design system template so that we have this form that is consistent with federal designs. And the way that we built this tool specifically is that we have our metadata standard, which is in the form of a JSON schema. And we have the tool ingest the schema, identify each field, which can be converted to form.io components. And from there, we're easily able to produce our form for our metadata collection needs. Next slide. And so while doing development and testing using form.io, we noticed that there were styling and accessibility warnings that were coming from the form.io components itself. We noticed that they were super simple fixes, so we were able to had the opportunity to make contributions upstream to get this fixed for everyone. So yes, the power of open source. And we'd like to give a huge shout out to the form.io upstream team for being responsive and their collaboration and support with our Sure IT Act stack. And I will turn it over to Sachin to talk more about how we go about updating and maintaining metadata.
Thanks, Natalia. Yeah, so now that we have a actual code.json metadata file generated through the form site, we need a way to actually maintain it over time because metadata can change, projects change. It's just a natural way of things. So what we created is we created a GitHub action where users can basically pull out information from their repository, and using that information, we could automatically fill out portions of the code.json, significantly reducing burdens. So all users have to do is add our workflow to their repository. That workflow creates a PR based on the information from their repository, and users can then check that PR and see if the information that was given is actually accurate. And they could also make manual edits right on the GitHub UI rather than on a code editor or even on like a command line or something like that. So this automates making a repository Share IT Act compliant. This automates it in the initial phase and in the future phase, because if you don't want to use the form and you just want to use the GitHub action, this could actually generate the code.json file form from scratch, and it handles the future component of it by updating it as you go. So this significantly improves user experience for both non-technical people and technical people. And now I will pass it to Isaac to talk about our index generator.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Sachin. The code.json index generator is a tool that we developed in order to make it easier for people to generate and aggregate code.json metadata files into a singular index file that represents the metadata for various projects within that agency. In order to accomplish that goal, we've created a code.json index generator tool that works as a CLI as well as a front end that can, as I said, aggregate all code.json files within all repositories in all GitHub organizations within an agency to create the mandated index file, reducing burden for CMS, HHS, and others. To further accomplish this goal, we have also created a sub Python package uploaded to PyPy that we used for this tool in the form, as well as our code.gov 2025 rewrite using this package that now supports multiple code forges.
And the beauty of open source is that we can reuse the code. As a bonus, Title II of the Evidence Act, which was passed a few years ago, I believe in 2018, requires the agency have open data plans and that federal data is publicly available by default, and that there is a comprehensive searchable data inventory of all the agency data assets. So the same front end that we use to aggregate all the code.json files in GitHub repositories, we were easily able to fork and modify that to aggregate all of the data.json files as well. So this is really a prime example of the power of modular open source development to help reduce burden and cost through reuse. And reuse is literally in the title of the Share IT Act. It's the Source Code Harmonization and Reuse of Information Technology Act. So there's a certain poeticness to actually reusing our stack to solve other problems, even as early on as we are in the implementation journey. So for now, we did a lot of talking, right? This is the stuff that we built out, and we wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction, but actions and demos speak louder than words. So we wanted to give you folks a little bit of a run through of the stack so you can see it in action. And Sachin is going to open up a few different URLs. These are all live on the internet. We will post these into chat as we talk about them, so folks can follow along and check them out. So this is our Share IT Act landing page. This is our one-stop shop that Dina was talking about, where you can get all the information. It starts out with, at the top, the Share IT Act bill summary. And because it's the web, we are able to provide some further context. So you can mouse over the things that have the dotted lines, and it will tell you, according to various acts and regulations and executive orders, what are the definition of some of these pieces of jargon. Because one of the things we learned early on in our user research was that, not every lawyer is an expert in technology, and not every technologist is an expert in open source. So it's really important to provide that extra vocabulary and context for people and do it in a web accessible way. And we really love how this is interactive. On top of that, there's also there's just a glossary page. So you don't have to do it just inside of the context of this. We link out separately to each of these. And this is all included in our OSPO guide, our Open Source Program Office guide, which is our one-stop shop for all of our OSPO resources outside of and including the Share IT Act. So thank you for showing those. And we start off with, setting that common definition in that common context. Then you scroll down and it tells you, okay, there's 3 different sections. We got the docs, we've got the metadata, that's the standard for the act, and then we have the tools that help to implement the standard. And when we scroll down a little bit farther, the different elements of the documentation, FAQs, yes, plain English, absolutely agree. And if there are common questions that we have heard, we put them into a place that's an FAQ, so that people can learn. Because if someone has a question, there's a pretty good chance that somebody else has the same question. That's one of the key things that we learn in open source. So we try to surface that and put it somewhere. A big shout out to the DoD. They have one of the most effective and impressive open source FAQs on the internet, not just in government. The DoD open source FAQ is just amazing, and we reference it all the time here at work. In addition to the FAQs and plain language tools like the glossary, we also have the nerdy details of things like the schema. So, it's JSON version 2022 compliant and all the technical jargon and details there. We talk about our implementation details. We have real world metadata examples, not just of the schema itself, but what it looks like when it's filled out. The legislation, which you saw at the top, the various exemptions, because there are a lot of them and they get very specific, and then the glossary. So if we scroll on a bit further, continuing on with this plain language theme, a lot of people say, okay, there's a lot of different layers, there's a lot of different stuff. What does it mean for me to comply with the Share IT Act? So we came up with this journey, and there are different steps. So if you're a project that is managed by a team or contractors, there are basically a couple different steps. One, you want to identify the key information about your repository. So is it owned by, is it maintained, is it public or private? What are the URLs? These are the kinds of information that you're going to need to fill out the form. So it helps to prepare people before they fill out the form so they know what they're getting into. Then you're going to add your code.json file to your repository. How do you do that? Well, you can use this cool website form that we built, or you can use this cool automated GitHub tool that we built. And then if you want to automate the updates in the future, here's this other tool that we wrote that Sachin was telling you about that you can use in CI. So as long as that code JSON file is in your repo, you are ready, Share IT Act ready. So that's for the individuals. If we scroll back up to the top here, you'll see that for agencies themselves, they also have some responsibilities under Share IT. So they are step 1, identifying where the source code lives on which platforms, then generating some kind of index for it. And you can use our index on our website or this Python tool that we created in the backend if you want to generate an index not using a form. And then you're going to provide that on your agency's top level domain or expose it on a public GitHub repo. And we have tools that will scrape from both of those locations so that we can comply with the existing M1621 metadata standard, as well as some future hopeful aspirational tools that we also built on top of the Share IT stack that are still under development and hopefully we can share in the future. And then lastly, the Share IT Act also requires some accountability. So there needs to be this inventory of all the metadata of all the federal source code. And then the administrator of the Office of Electronic Government submits a report with all the exempted software, including the justifications, to Congress. And then the Comptroller General and the GAO submits a report at the end of 2 years talking about the implementation and the impact. So an implementation assessment is what it's called. So those are all the 3 different layers: the project layer, the agency layer, and the overall program layer, or the federal-wide layer. And to help out with each of those different pieces, we have all these different tools. And today we're really going to focus on 2 of them because this is FormFest. We built out forms to really help us to do this implementation. And the first form is our code.json generator. So this is live on the net. We built this out so that you're looking at the CMS specific version right now, but we also built a generic version, which has a metadata that will work for all federal agencies. One of the things with the reuse part of the Share IT Act is that we didn't want people to have to fork this project and reinstall it or host it on a web page or stand up a server to do it or hire contractors to maintain it. So when we built this for us, we said, you can just swap out your metadata standard if you want to add some fields that aren't required for your agency, and then use the same form as we're using to fill out ours. It's a static web page. It's hosted on GitHub. It reduces costs. It reduces burden. It doesn't require money, and it's free for open source projects. So that's the first sort of principle that we followed when we were building out this form: reuse. So it has some instructions at the top. And if you're like, what even is this? You have a link to go back to the Share IT landing page if you landed there on accident, and it'll give you more context. So the first step is to identify your classification. If you know you're open source, you can click that. But if you're like, I don't know, or I don't think I'm any of the above, you can click none of the above. And then it will take you into the submissions for exemptions and things like that. And then if you're open source, it says, great, you probably have a public repo. So let's go ahead and put in the URL. To be very recursive and in line with the free and open source software nerds in the audience, we're going to actually send the URL for the repository for the form itself. And then it will automatically complete some of the fields, like Nat said. I think it was like 14 out of the 34 that are in the vanilla schema. It pulls the descriptions, it pulls the license, it generates the usage type. It populates a lot of these details, and there are a lot of them. It includes things like the fork count on GitHub, because the Share IT Act really cares about reuse rates. There's also a section in here that talks about the AI use case, whether or not you have an ID for the AI use case. This was M2505, I believe. So this is a new executive order that talks about requirements for identifying AI projects that are in the federal government and providing use cases for them. So even though it's not required by the Share IT Act, we're like, hey, if you know you're in the AI use case, then just give us your ID and we can include that in the metadata as well. And then that makes it easier for us to sort of check 2 boxes with one form. And we can implement multiple executive orders and follow multiple acts all within the same place. So all these different forms and fields, we're not going to go through every single field in the form. There are many of them. But part of it is that if you had to do this by yourself on the command line or with a text editor or sending in an email, it would probably be a little bit more difficult. So once you filled in all of this stuff, you can click Generate Code JSON Metadata. And you can see a little preview window down here. It'll show you sort of what's been generated, and you can visually check it. And then we have, like Nat said, 4 different options where you can copy it directly to your clipboard. You can download the file directly to your machine. If you put in your GitHub API key, you can send a pull request directly to your repository, which is a nice feature for our developer friends in the audience. And also for our people who are exempt but still need to share their private repository metadata, there's an email button directly in the form that will open up your email client and send it to a predetermined email address so that we can get an initial copy of that metadata, even if we can't get access to your repository itself. So today we're going to do the download workflow. So you're a project, you wrote the code JSON generator, you download your code.json file, and then it's as easy as going to GitHub, going to your repository, clicking upload files, dragging and dropping your code.json file that you just generated with your form, and then going into your browser and committing the changes directly to the main branch, or sending a pull request if you want to follow open source practices. But really, dragging, dropping, here's your file. It's all the things that the form generated. It's in your repository, and this should make your project Share IT Act ready. And it just takes a couple of clicks from the form. So now that we have the code.json form, we want to keep it updated, because one of the lessons that we learned originally from M1621 is that data calls are really a big thing in government. I'm sure even our friends in the state government have to send out an email periodically asking people to fill out some spreadsheet or add their name to a wiki and tell us where your systems are and do a system census. Or there's a lot of ways that the government does a lot of manual data collection, which is necessary in some cases, but is a lot of burden. So instead, we were like, let's write a GitHub action that will automatically update your metadata, and you can run it on commit. You can run it periodically. You can run it weekly, monthly, once a year, whatever your project decides you're comfortable with. And it will do things like, oh, hey, it looks like the labor hours that you have put into your project have increased based on this standard model that we use from a tool called SCC. Or, hey, it has last been modified and the metadata was last updated on these days. This is very difficult for a non-technical stakeholder like a core contracting official representative who does not deal with GitHub repos and hasn't touched a source code repository before. If we can automatically generate that information and they don't have to go and hunt for it, that makes their lives a lot easier. And we can do it automatically so that we don't even need a person in the loop other than to just say, yes, merge this. And in our user research, we've already had folks asking us like, hey, we trust the output from this tool. It's better to have something than nothing. Can we just have it commit directly to instead of submitting a pull request? So we are still learning a lot by rolling this out. It's still very early on in our implementation journey, and we're excited to partner with other people on tools like the automated code JSON generator. So once your project has metadata in it, then we need to have the agency upload it to their top level domain or put it on the internet. So if you go to our parent agency, Health and Human Services, hhs.gov/code.json, this is that index file, and it is a bear. It has a lot of projects in it. It includes everybody: CDC, NIH, CMS, FDA, all the different optives or operational divisions across the Department of Health and Human Services. All of our individual repository metadata goes into this one file. And we know from previous conversations with Dr. Kristen Honey, our Chief Data Officer here at HHS, that this is likely manual labor that has to be done, just like the data call that goes out where we have to manually find all these repositories. So wouldn't it be great if we could automate this as well? And so our team created the index generator. So you go in, and this will work for our agency, so you can put in HHS, but other agencies could use the same thing as well. They list out which GitHub organizations they would like to track, and then you say what version of the metadata that you're going to be using. And if you have a lot of repos, then you can put in a GitHub token so that you can not have to bump up against the API limits. And then when you click Generate Index, it will go through and look at all of the repositories for any that contain the code.json file. And then it will tell you which ones contain it. So on the left, we have successful repositories. So green means yes, we have it. Red X means nope, we don't. And then that way the agency knows which projects are in compliance with Share IT or not. And this automatically pops up a code.json index file, just like the one that's on the HHS website, so that that person in the chief data officer role or in their office or whoever is responsible for uploading this file, they can just then put this on the top level domain, or they can put it on GitHub and we can scrape it from there. So either way, we hope that this will reduce the amount of burden for the people who have to actually do the implementation at the agency level as well. So we want to make lives lower burden costs for our users and maintainers of projects, and we want to reduce the burden for the folks at the agency who have to actually collate all of this information and put it out there. And I believe that that is the extent of our demos. So thank you, Sachin, for driving those. We have one more slide. So this is all like nerdy metadata form stuff. Like what does it really matter? Like what are the stakes? Why should we care? If we have, say, 10,000 repositories at the agency, and let's be generous and say it takes maybe an hour to fill out all that information on a data.json or a code.json file for your repository. If we can use forms and automation to reduce that burden by 80%, then we think we can save about 9,000 hours of burden each year. And if you include the labor hours that went into actually creating these tools, we think that that'll save the agency about $1 million in the first year, and 50,000 hours in the second year, and 100,000 hours by the 10th year. The 5th year and the 10th year. So if you do that at an $80 an hour rate, those 9,000 hours come out to that $1 million figure. But that's just to collect the metadata, right? Like that's just to say where the inventory is. That's not the reuse part of the Share IT Act. So let's say that CMS's annual IT spend was $2.8 billion in 2023. And of that, we spent about $700 million on developing new software, DME, development, modernization, and enhancement. So custom software. If we could reuse just 1% of the software that we are already paying for, that taxpayers have already funded, we could save the agency $5 million. If we can get to 5%, that's like 28 million. At 10%, it's like 56 million. And that's at like an 80% reuse efficiency rate, because obviously you're not going to be able to just copy and paste the code. You're still going to have to go in and modify things. So if we get to something like 50%, it's like $250 million a year. And that's at our agency. Now, granted, like you saw, we are a massive portion of the federal budget, and not all agencies are as lucky as us to have the budgets that we do and the resources that we do. But there are over 400 agencies listed in the Federal Register who will have to comply with the Share IT Act. So even if they were only spending $1 million, we believe that this represents a significant cost savings for the taxpayers, and ideally a significant savings in the time and effort it takes for our federal employees and civil servants and our contractors and our community members in the world to comply with this new legislation. Because one of the things about the Share IT Act is that it did not come with any appropriations funding. So when we're building the open source way, we want to reduce the burden. We want to reduce not just the burden for the plain text and understanding it and the things that you have to do to comply, but the financial burden is really important. And we don't need 400 copies of the Share IT Act stack out there at every agency that needs to be rebuilt over and over again. So we're hopeful that this can serve as a model for other agencies, and we are open to contributions, and we look forward to partnering with other agencies as we roll out our act, our stack for the act, and continue on the Share IT Act journey. And I believe that's the end of our presentation. So thank you so much, FormFest, for having us. Big shout out to our friends at FormFest for having us here to share the story. There's some links to our OSPO, our website, our landing page for Share IT, our email address where you can get a hold of our team, and of course the deck itself, if that's useful and you want to follow up on anything here. Otherwise, we'd like to open it up for questions and feedback to hear from you folks, to see what you are interested in hearing more about. And
cool. I have
Nat.
the Q&A queue up, so I can announce the questions. Let's see. Confirm. Okay. So we have one question. I'm a designer and I might have missed this, but what is the explicit purpose of this code, of this JSON file and such?
Yeah. So the explicit purpose of this JSON file is to provide an inventory of all the custom developed code across the federal government with the goal that we can reuse some of it. So in our IT acquisition policies for many agencies, M1621 states that you need to do market research before you build something or before you buy something. So like if you're going to go and make a big expensive purchase like a car, you probably just don't walk up to the first car dealership on your road and then look at the first car at the end of the lot and then buy it, right? Usually you're doing some comparative analysis and trying to figure out what features you want and what's already out there on the market. So you should do the same thing for public source software in the public sector. So giving people an opportunity to see what other software has been built and what already exists so that they don't have to start from scratch all the time, because starting from scratch is a lot more expensive than starting from somewhere and going forward. So great question, Claire. Thank you for the question. What else we got, Nat?
Okay, we have another question about the glossary. The glossary is amazing. Can you talk more about how it works? How are the tooltips with accessibility?
Good question. I will defer to our glossary developers here on the team. Dina, you're on mute if you're trying to talk.
Oops. Okay, sorry. That was technical difficulties. The glossary, the tooltips work. We are always working on accessibility. Currently, as a rollover, they are not completely 100% accessible, but we are working on that. However, the glossary itself is 508 compliant and 100% accessible. Again, the tooltips are a little bit difficult, but we are always working on improving those.
And that's why we have both, because definitely great call out there. We are always trying to be 508 compliant and accessible by default.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Currently, it seems the Share IT website is hosted on GitHub. Are there plans to move to a .gov domain to make it more official?
Well, it's easy to make plans, and I think the short answer to that is probably yes. There's a big, complicated process and a lot of moving parts to setting up a new .gov website. We are just early on in our implementation journey, so we are more than happy to partner with and work alongside of the folks at the places where those websites might be hosted and work through the process of applying for that .gov domain. So the short answer is stay tuned. We'll see, but we are working on it.
Awesome. Next, do you know how agency heads were made aware of this act? I'm curious if our program needs to add this information. Additionally, do you know when compliance deadlines are?
Great. So maybe I should have started at the very beginning by saying I'm not a lawyer and this does not constitute legal or financial advice. With that being said and out of the way, this originally, there has been some press around it and it's been in the Federal Register and other things like that. But there were some deadlines that were put into the legislation, much like other pieces of legislation. Some of those deadlines have already passed. There are some, if you look into the act itself, it'll talk about when people were supposed to present what pieces of the guidance. So there's guidance from the e-government administrator that we're waiting on, and then the agency heads have to provide guidance on implementation to the operational division CIOs, and then the CIOs at the agency or operational division level will provide guidance on implementation. So we're like 3 layers down in the stack, and we're like, okay, we're assuming or making educated guesses based on existing standards and other programs like code.gov's original code.json file, that this is how it was implemented in the past. With those assumptions underway, this is how we would go about fixing it and complying. And so we're hopeful that that will inform all of the compliance and implementation language and guidance, ideally so that we don't have 1,000 different flowers blooming. So I would say that we are just early. We are super excited because we're the open source nerds here in the federal government. So we are like sharing information about software. Yes, we want to share all the software. That's what we do here. So yes, we were way ahead of schedule and we've been working on this since since January, the moment that we found out that it was live and it had passed and that we were back on the clock. I suspect that other agencies will be interested in complying. And if you would like to join or form some kind of community of practice around this, we are definitely open to collaboration and working with other agencies. So stay tuned. You should hear more about it. But we're just a little early on and we're ultra excited about it.
We have a question from Sierra. You said this is very new, but I'm curious if any agencies have started using your tools.
I've been doing a lot of talking. Does anybody else want to take this one?
I can start this off. Yeah, so we've been rolling out our tools to various agencies. We had some exciting meetings with them this past summer, kind of introducing them to our stack. What's super cool about this work is that they've also, some agencies such as the CDC and I believe the VA, they've also have repositories that are open source that they published with how they went about implementing this act. So it's really cool to see how different agencies have tackled certain challenges with implementing the act. And because these implementations are open source, we can reuse the code to kind of tackle those same challenges.
Yeah. So CDC is one of our, we reference them. We've definitely interested in how they are tackling the private repository challenge, because private repos are difficult to do access for, and they came up with their DevSecOps team is fantastic. Big shout outs to the team over there. They built out some very cool tools, and we definitely are pointing other agencies towards those to say, here's how you can tackle the private repo part of this, because the public repo side is straightforward. We use the GitHub API, but if you can get your private index onto public GitHub, then we can bridge that gap and comply with the act without having to create all the infrastructure and do auth and accounts and everything else, which is really exciting.
Okay, cool. We have another question. What are your hopes and dreams for these tools and these resources? What types of feedback would be helpful for you as your teams explore these tools?
What do you think, team? What are your hopes and dreams?
I can go. My hopes and dreams for these tools is that we see wide government reuse, kind of following along the vein of the last question. Again, the results speak for themselves, like especially the cost savings. Like you heard it, we could save $250 million, and that's like what, a quarter of our DME budget for CMS alone, which again I said earlier is 22% of our entire US federal budget. So $250 million is a lot of money, and that's like a very high goal, but you have to also understand that is one agency. So multiply that by the numerous amount of agencies that we have in the US. It is a ton of money we're saving. And again, open source is all about transparency, which I believe that should always be prevalent within government. And the second part is, what types of feedback would be helpful for you as teams explore these tools? Honestly, just using our tools and we've been pretty focused on user experience. So if you run into anything user experience related, like if you don't see that the flow is flowing good, or if you don't certainly or necessarily agree with some of our design decisions, I think that would be extremely helpful for our further development of these tools.
Anybody else hopes and dreams?
Yeah, I can just echo what Sachin said, just like getting people to use their tools, making that easier, making that more effective in order for their to satisfy their use cases. That and just contributing to an open source ecosystem, contributing upstream, and being able to increase interoperability and code reuse and throughout the federal government, and contribute to the culture in that way.
Yeah. And I would add that, go ahead, Nat.
Oh yeah, if I can add, let's see. So this effort kind of assists a greater effort of kind of curating a federal inventory of all federal software across all agencies. And this work has been done in the past through code.gov. So it's really meaningful and super impactful for us how we're kind of continuing on this work through the Sure IT Act. And by collecting metadata on all these software projects, this kind of unlocks so many opportunities for us to better understand the software ecosystem of the federal government and how we can kind of improve upon the way we do software development overall. So metadata unlocks so many new information and insights that we can get.
Yes. And I'll add two things in our last 30 seconds or how many ever we have here. One of them is that the report to Congress, we really believe that it could be as simple as printing the version of code.gov to a PDF or having a 12-month look back window of all the repositories, because once we've implemented it in code, then we should be able to generate it automatically. And that shouldn't be anyone's job to go and do a data call. And that should also save a ton of time and provide a great feedback loop for the government and the taxpayers. I see there's a bunch of questions in review, so I'm going to try to lightning round answer as many of them as I can. Would you say asking our cores and program leads about the status of this is a good idea? I think that a lot of times cores probably haven't heard of it yet, but if you want to send them our way, we're more than happy to talk with them. There's a JSON-based form building rendering tools. Other ones, did you consider others, and what made you land on forms.io? Great question. If there are other frameworks that we should have considered that we did not do, please send them our way. We are definitely interested, but we like forms.io because it had a US web design system implementation that was really helpful for us to comply with the federal standards for web design. And then the last question is, can staff and end user training materials and documentation be centrally maintained and reused across agencies, or is it too implementation specific? That's the goal. We really want this to be something that we wrote once and redeploy many times. That's why we have like CMS has a metadata template, and then HHS can have one and C2C can have one. So we can say like, here, generate the docs for the generic form, and then the specific fields, like you can add the descriptions to those to provide documentation. So we hope that it can be centrally managed as an open source community. This is all on GitHub. Our friend from New York City asked, can your agency also make use of the system? Yes, everything is open source. It's all live. It's all on GitHub right now. If you want to fork it, it's available to you. And I know we're a minute over, so I will stop talking and just end with thank you to Isaac, Sachin, Dina, and Natalia. You all built this stack, and we are so proud of the work that you have done here at the agency. This is what the future of civic hacking looks like. And if you're interested in helping to serve, please reach out. We are hiring in the government, and we need more civic hackers to build lots more forms to save more money and time for the American taxpayers and provide value to our ecosystem. So thank you, FormFest, for having us.